have I got a killer crop for you tonight, fiends and phantoms, freshly plucked from the vineyards of fright. I trust you've all settled into your coffins comfortably, or perhaps you're just dying to get started. This one's a real barn burner, a story that's sure to get under your skin, and maybe even into your marrow. It's about a love that was more than just skin deep. We journey to a place where the soil is rich, but the secrets are richer and far more deadly. A place where the nights are long, the shadows dance, and something wicked this way prowls. This one's a real howler, kiddies, straight from your nightmares.
The farm lay nestled deep in a valley no road seemed to remember. A patchwork of tilled earth and grazing fields, hemmed in by an ancient, brooding forest. The trees stood like silent, judgmental sentinels, their branches gnarled and reaching, casting long, skeletal shadows as the sun bled out of the sky. Jebediah knew this land. It was in his bones, same as the ache that settled in his back after a long day's toil. He was a man carved from the very soil he worked, weathered and stoic, his hands calloused maps of hardship. His wife, Elara, was the softer line against his rough-hewn existence. Her laughter once a melody that could lighten the grimmest chore. Their farmhouse, a sturdy structure of timber and stone, was miles from the nearest neighbor, a lonely outpost against the encroaching wilderness. The silence here was a living thing, vast and oppressive, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the pines or the distant, mournful cry of a night bird. The first inkling that the farm's isolation had bred something more than loneliness came with the dawn. Jebediah found the chicken coop a scene of abject carnage. It wasn't the work of a fox, nor a weasel. Those creatures killed for sustenance, a swift nip to the neck, a stolen meal. This was a massacre, a frenzied explosion of violence. Feathers, white and brown, lay plastered against the walls like some grotesque confetti, mingled with splatters of crimson that painted the packed earth in abstract, horrifying patterns. The bodies of the hens were not merely killed, they were annihilated. Some were torn limb from limb, their insides strewn across the coop. He found one hen, its chest cavity ripped open, its small heart impossibly still giving a final, faint flutter amidst the ruin. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the stench of fear. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome as a winter frost, seeped into Jebediah's soul. He'd seen animal death before, the brutal but understandable calculus of nature. This was different. This was rage. This was wrong. He muttered about a rabid dog, maybe a pack of coyotes driven mad by hunger, but the words felt hollow, even to his own ears. The sheer, unadulterated savagery didn't fit any predator he knew. Elara, when he showed her the devastation, made the expected sounds of distress. But her eyes, there was a strange stillness in them, a depth he couldn't quite fathom. She offered comfort, her hand on his arm, but her touch felt cool, almost distant. "It must have been a terrible creature, Jed," she'd said, her voice a little too calm, a little too measured. "Something from the deep woods." Her gaze drifted towards the dark tree line, and for a fleeting moment, a glint he couldn't name flickered in her eyes before vanishing. The slaughter in the chicken coop was only the overture. The following week, Jebediah found one of his sheep in the far pasture. Its throat was a gaping, ragged wound. The wool around it stained a dark, sticky brown. Its hindquarters were savagely mauled, great strips of flesh torn away, exposing the bone beneath. The ground around it was churned and blood-soaked, telling of a desperate, futile struggle. The air buzzed with flies, a grim chorus to the silent horror. A few nights later, it was one of their pigs. The sturdy wooden gate of its pen had been smashed inwards, the thick planks splintered as if by a battering ram. The pig lay on its side, its belly ripped open, a significant portion of its bulk simply gone. Jebediah could see the clear imprints of massive teeth on the remaining ribs, and the sickening crunch of what looked like crushed bone fragments scattered nearby. Each discovery was more graphic, each scene a fresh canvas for the unseen artist of this escalating terror. The farm, once a place of life and sustenance, was rapidly becoming a charnel house, steeped in an ominous mood that clung to everything like a shroud. Jebediah's stoicism began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing fear that tightened in his chest and stole his sleep. He took to patrolling the farm nightly, his old shotgun heavy in his hands, his eyes straining against the oppressive darkness. He found tracks, sometimes large, indistinct prints in the soft earth near the forest edge, deeper and wider than any wolf or dog he'd ever seen. He set heavy steel traps, baited with chunks of meat, only to find them sprung the next morning, twisted and bent out of shape. The bait gone, the earth around them disturbed but empty. The silence of the night, once a comfort, now seemed to hum with unseen menace. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, a potential harbinger of the beast. As Jebediah descended into a state of haunted vigilance, Elara too began to change. Though her transformations were far more subtle, almost imperceptible at first, her moods, always a little off-balanced, seemed to wax and wane with an almost tidal rhythm. A new restlessness gripping her around the time the moon swelled to its luminous peak. Sometimes a strange, earthy scent would cling to her musky and wild, a scent that reminded Jebediah of the damp floor of the forest after a rain. He'd catch her staring out at the moon, her face pale and unreadable, her eyes reflecting the silver light with an intensity that was almost feral. Unexplained scratches would appear on her arms or legs, thin red lines she'd dismiss with a vague excuse about a thorn bush or a clumsy moment in the barn. Once, he even saw her effortlessly hoist a sack of feed that usually took his own considerable strength to manage, a fleeting display of power that left him momentarily speechless. She began to wander more at night, claiming insomnia, her silhouette a fleeting shadow against the moonlit windows. Her interest in the animal deaths became more pronounced, her questions about the creature, its methods, a little too specific, a little too keen, a disturbing psychology emerging from beneath her familiar surface. The night of the full moon arrived, hanging in the inky sky like a baleful silver eye. The air was unnaturally still, charged with a palpable tension, the kind that precedes a violent summer storm. Jebediah felt it coiling in his gut, a cold knot of dread. He was a man stretched to his breaking point, his nerves frayed, his shotgun loaded and ready by the door. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, and the face that stared back at him from the cracked mirror in the morning was a hollow-eyed stranger's. A low, guttural growl ripped through the silence, closer this time, followed by the terrified high-pitched squeal of their last remaining horse from the barn. Then came the sickening sound of splintering wood, a sharp crack that echoed across the yard like a gunshot. "It's in the barn!" Jebediah rasped, grabbing his shotgun and the flickering oil lantern. He threw open the farmhouse door and ran towards the barn, the lantern light dancing crazily, casting monstrous shadows. The main barn door was hanging off of one hinge, a gaping black maw. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh blood and primal fear. His horse lay on the straw-strewn floor, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, its eyes wide and glassy, and standing over it, silhouetted against the pale moonlight flickering through the hole in the roof, was the creature. Or rather, it was Elara. But not Elara. A strangled cry lodged in Jebediah's throat. He watched, frozen in ultimate horror, as her form began to contort. A burning heat seemed to radiate from her, and a low, agonized moan escaped her lips. a sound that was both human and not. Her bones audibly cracked and reshaped, her spine arching, her limbs elongating and twisting. Thick, coarse fur, the color of midnight, sprouted with horrifying speed across her skin, obscuring the familiar contours of his wife. Her fingers lengthened into wicked, curving claws, her nails turning black and sharp. Her face stretched and warped, her nose elongating into a snout, her teeth sharpening into vicious fangs that dripped with saliva. The transformation was an excruciating, visceral torment, a grotesque ballet of anatomical deconstruction and monstrous rebirth. When it was over, the thing that stood before him was no longer Elara. It was a werewolf, a towering beast of muscle and fur, its eyes glowing with a malevolent yellow light. It let out a deafening roar, a sound that promised pain and death, and then it lunged. Jebediah stumbled back, the lantern crashing to the ground, plunging the barn into a terrifying dance of moonlight and deep shadow. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy in his trembling hands. This was the monster he had hunted, the source of all the carnage, the shadow from the woods, and it wore his wife's stolen form. Disbelief warred with a primal terror. Could he shoot? Could he bring himself to destroy the vessel that had once held the woman he loved? The werewolf gave him no time for an answer. Driven by pure primal instinct, it slammed into him. Claws raked at his arm, and fangs snapped inches from his face. The climactic confrontation was not a battle of wits or will, but a desperate, brutal struggle for survival against a nightmare made flesh.
If you're enjoying this terrifying tale, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more if you dare.
The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and blood orange, casting a sickly light over the ravaged farm. The barn was a scene of unimaginable devastation. The werewolf Elara lay still in a pool of her own dark blood, the silver buckshot from Jebediah's last desperate shot having found its mark. As the sun climbed higher, the monstrous form slowly, almost reluctantly, began to recede. The fur retracting, the bones shifting with soft, sickening clicks, until the naked human form of Elara lay amidst the carnage, her skin pale and marred with bruises and cuts. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful in death, offering no clue as to whether she remembered her nocturnal horrors or was horrified by them in her final moments. Jebediah survived, if such a state could be called survival. He was a broken man, his body wounded, his spirit shattered. The love he had known, the life he had built, had been revealed as a monstrous lie, a terrifying secret festering beneath the surface of the mundane. He sat on the porch of the silent farmhouse, the shotgun across his knees, staring out at the blood-soaked earth. The silence was now different. It was the silence of absence, of profound and utter loss, a silence filled with the ghosts of what had been, and the unbearable knowledge of what his wife had become. The isolation of the farm, once a simple fact of geography, was now a crushing weight, a tomb of his own making. There would be no easy comfort, no neat resolutions to this tale of terror. The horror would linger, a permanent stain on his soul, a constant reminder of the beast that had slept beside him, the love that had turned to ash and blood, the ambiguity of Elara's awareness, the true origin of her curse. These were questions that would haunt his remaining days, whispers in the unending silence of the farm.
Well, kiddies. Looks like that marriage really went to the dogs. She's always said he made her howl with pleasure. Guess she meant it literally. Talk about a rough ending. Goes to show, you should always know what you're getting into before you tie the knot, or perhaps the leash in this case. She really had a killer instinct to that one. Talk about a beastly bride. You could say their love wasn't just puppy love, it was werewolf love, and that, my fiends, has a much bigger bite. He wanted a loyal companion, and boy did he get one. She was doggedly devoted. to tearing things apart. And poor Jebediah, he's probably feeling quite melancholy now. What a awful situation. I guess you could say she was barking mad. Until next time, boils and ghouls, may your nights be frightful and your graves be ever so uncomfortable. Pleasant screams.
Tales from the Crypt.